For many decades, BrianKeith was admired as one of Hollywood's most beloved leading men. He had the kind of rugged charm and calm strength that audiences adored. His role as the caring father in FamilyAffair made him a household name and a symbol of trust, dependability, and warmth. Fans saw him as the perfect gentleman, both on and off screen. But fame often hides what happens behind the camera. Those who worked with Brian sometimes saw a completely different side of the man America loved. Behind the easy smile and composed attitude was a person who could be difficult, unpredictable, and hard to please. While millions saw him as the strong father figure they could look up to, not everyone who acted beside him shared that admiration. In fact, there was one woman, a talented actress who worked closely with him, who couldn't stand to be around him. For years, she carried a quiet resentment that turned into something much deeper, pure hatred. Fans never knew the reason why she felt that way, and for decades, she refused to talk about it. But eventually, the truth surfaced. And what came out painted a far more complex picture of BrianKeith than anyone expected. The story of her hatred begins during the height of BrianKeith's career in the 1960s. At that time, he was one of television's biggest stars, adored by both critics and audiences. When this young actress was cast to work alongside him, it felt like a dream come true. She was talented, ambitious, and determined to make a name for herself in a tough industry dominated by men. Sharing the screen with such a respected star should have been a major step forward for her. But what should have been a golden opportunity quickly turned into a nightmare. From the very first days on set, she began to notice a troubling side of Brian. He could be charming one moment and cold the next. He interrupted her lines, made sarcastic remarks, and often dismissed her ideas. His behavior seemed to change with his moods, leaving the entire crew uncertain of how to act around him. For a woman trying to earn respect in a business that rarely gave it, his attitude was more than frustrating, it was painful. She tried to stay professional, hiding her discomfort behind a polite smile, but it wasn't easy. Other cast members noticed her tension, how she stiffened whenever Brian entered the room, how her laughter during interviews felt forced. The cheerful chemistry audiences saw on screen was, in reality, a mask hiding quiet suffering. In those days, Hollywood was still a place where men held most of the power. Women were often expected to be agreeable, quiet, and grateful for any opportunity they received. BrianKeith, like many male stars of his era, carried an old-fashioned sense of authority. He saw himself as the anchor of the show, the one who carried the story, while his female co-stars were simply there to support him. The actress who worked with him quickly realized that he didn't see her as an equal. He talked over her during rehearsals, criticized her performances in front of others, and treated her opinions as unimportant. To outsiders, his actions may have looked like teasing, but to her, they were humiliating. She began to feel smaller and smaller each day, her confidence slowly slipping away. Despite her talent, she was made to feel like she didn't belong. Behind closed doors, she confided in close friends, telling them how difficult it was to work with him. She once told a friend, "Everyone calls him America's dad, but to me, he feels more like a tyrant." Yet she stayed silent in public, because speaking out in that era could destroy a woman's career. No studio wanted to hire an actress labeled as difficult, so she endured it, day after day, while quietly building a wall around her emotions. Every person has a breaking point, and for her, it came during one especially emotional day on set. She had just finished filming a powerful scene that required deep emotion and vulnerability. The director was impressed, and the crew even applauded her performance. For a brief moment, she felt proud and respected. But that moment vanished as soon as BrianKeith entered the room. Instead of congratulating her, he mocked her in front of everyone. He called her acting too dramatic, and laughed as if her effort was nothing more than a joke. The worst part wasn't his words, it was hearing the crew's nervous laughter, as if they were afraid to disagree with him. That humiliation cut deeply. From that day on, her frustration turned into genuine hatred. She avoided him as much as possible, keeping her distance whenever the cameras weren't rolling. What audiences saw as natural chemistry between them was, in truth, her ability to channel real emotion born from pain and anger. Every time she had to smile beside him on camera, she was silently reliving that cruel moment. Brian may not have realized how much damage his behavior had caused, but for her, the scars were permanent. What should have been the highlight of her career instead became a painful memory she carried for years. As time went on, the actress continued her career, but something inside her had changed. The joy she once felt for acting faded. Working with BrianKeith had left her emotionally drained. She began to see Hollywood differently, not as a glamorous world of opportunity, but as a place where women were often disrespected and silenced. The more famous Brian became, the harder it was for her to move on. Every time she saw his face on posters or reruns, she was reminded of the pain he caused. Yet, she couldn't speak up. Hollywood in those days was built on image, and calling out a powerful man could mean professional suicide. So she stayed quiet, even as her resentment grew. People who didn't know the truth often asked why she seemed distant whenever his name came up. They thought it was just old workplace tension, but those close to her knew it went much deeper. She had once admired him, but that admiration had turned into lasting bitterness. For years, she carried that emotional burden alone, pretending everything was fine while hiding the pain behind a composed face. No one realized how much strength it took just to keep that secret. Decades later, long after both she and BrianKeith had moved on in their careers, she finally decided to speak her truth. Time had passed, and with it, her fear of Hollywood's judgment faded. In a heartfelt interview, she revealed everything she had kept hidden for years. Her words were raw, honest, and full of emotion. She said she had utterly hated BrianKeith, not in the casual sense, but in a way that haunted her for years. She explained how his dismissive behavior, constant criticism, and lack of respect had broken her spirit at a time when she needed encouragement the most. For the first time, fans saw the pain behind the smiles and laughter they had once watched on screen. Her story shocked many who had always admired BrianKeith. How could the man who played such kind and loving roles have been so harsh toward a co-star? Yet others, especially women who had faced similar struggles, felt deeply connected to her honesty. They understood what it meant to be silenced, to work hard only to be dismissed, and to endure mistreatment in silence. Her confession was not about revenge, it was about healing. After carrying that pain for so long, she finally felt free. After her confession, the way people viewed BrianKeith changed. His image as America's dad remained, but it was now shadowed by a more complicated truth. Some fans defended him, saying he was a product of his time. Others felt heartbroken, realizing that their beloved star had caused real pain to someone he worked with. For the actress, sharing her story was not about destroying Brian's legacy, was about reclaiming her own. She had spent years being overshadowed, and finally, she had her voice back. Her courage inspired others to speak about their experiences in Hollywood, a place where many had suffered in silence. The story became a reminder that fame often hides flaws, and that the people we idolize can sometimes be very different behind closed doors. Even though BrianKeith continued to be celebrated for his acting skills, the actress's words ensured that the full story would never be forgotten. Her honesty gave depth to history, showing that the truth, however painful, deserves to be told in the end. Her story was not just about BrianKeith, it was about every person who has ever felt unseen or mistreated in the workplace. It was about the courage to speak out after years of silence. For decades, she carried hatred in her heart, but by telling the truth, she turned that pain into strength. Her experience exposed the hidden struggles behind Hollywood's glamour. Audiences often see actors smiling, laughing, and performing together, unaware of what really happens behind the scenes. Her story forced fans to realize that fame does not always mean happiness, and that kindness and respect are far more important than reputation. BrianKeith will always be remembered as a talented actor and a legend of his era. But her story adds another layer to his legacy, reminder that even great men can have dark sides. By finally speaking her truth, she helped others understand that silence only protects pain, while honesty brings freedom. And in the end, that freedom was what she had longed for all her life. Though the wounds may never fully heal, her voice once silenced became a powerful symbol of truth and resilience. For decades, BrianKeith stood as one of Hollywood's most admired leading men. With his deep voice, rugged looks, and fatherly warmth, he captured the hearts of millions. His role in Family Affair made him a household name, a symbol of reliability and kindness. To the public, Brian was more than just an actor. He was a reflection of strength and decency. Families watched him each week, believing that the man they saw on television was the same in real life. But Hollywood is built on illusions, and behind the smiling faces and perfect characters often hides a much darker reality. Those who worked closest to Brian sometimes saw a version of him that didn't match his on-screen persona. Beneath the confident charm, he could be moody, controlling, and difficult to please. For one woman, a talented co-star who once admired him deeply, the truth about Brian became a painful reality that would haunt her for years. She didn't just dislike him, she utterly hated him. But for decades, the reason why remained one of Hollywood's quietest secrets. The woman at the heart of this story began her career with big dreams. She was beautiful, determined, and gifted. The kind of actress who lit up the screen with both emotion and grace. When she landed the role beside BrianKeith, it seemed like fate had finally smiled on her. Working with such an established star promised not only exposure but also validation. Everyone told her that this could be her big break, the moment that would define her future in show business. At first, she was nervous but excited. She had grown up watching Brian's films, admiring his craft and charisma. To her, he was a legend. But that admiration didn't last long. From the first day on set, she began to sense something was wrong. Brian didn't treat her with the same warmth he showed the crew or male actors. He was distant, dismissive, and sometimes openly impatient. What began as small, uncomfortable moments, an eye roll, a sarcastic remark, a cold stare, soon became a pattern. She tried to brush it off, convincing herself that perhaps he was just focused or tired. But deep down, she knew something was off. The man she thought she would respect became the source of her greatest frustration. BrianKeith's reputation among his peers was complicated. Some described him as charming and generous. Others said he could be demanding and unpredictable. He was known to have a temper, one that could flare suddenly, especially when he felt things weren't going his way. On camera, he could deliver warmth and humor effortlessly. But off camera, his moods could shift without warning. Those who worked with him often walked on eggshells, careful not to say or do anything that might trigger his anger. For male co-stars, his gruff personality was easier to shrug off. They saw it as part of his toughness. But for women, especially younger actresses trying to prove themselves, his attitude could be intimidating. The actress found herself trapped in that uncomfortable space. Every time she tried to do her best, he found a way to criticize her. Sometimes it was subtle, a sigh, a sarcastic comment, or a joke made at her expense. Other times, it was direct and humiliating. He would interrupt her lines or tell her she was trying too hard, undermining her confidence in front of everyone. For a rising actress, that kind of treatment was devastating. It wasn't just about ego, it was about respect. And she wasn't getting any dot. It's important to understand the world she lived in. Hollywood in the 1960s and 70s was a man's world. Women were often treated as decorations rather than professionals. Directors, producers, and leading men controlled